The guard they called the Ghost took 10 years for the most shocking revenge. The colony penitentiary stretches out, a vast, oppressive complex of shadow and cold steel. Suddenly, a figure strides into the main cell block. A man in a sharp suit, silhouetted against the blinding light of the entrance behind him. His presence is jarringly formal against the prison grunge. The only thing is the rhythmic, sharp click of his polished shoes echoing against the concrete walkway as he moves with focused intent, approaching one of the darkened cells. Lying slumped against the thick vertical bars, face turned away, is the prisoner, barely moving, perhaps asleep or simply broken by the cold, hard life inside. The suit stops directly in front of the cell. The man in the sharp suit looks down at the figure slumped on the cold cell floor. His voice is flat and cutting. "What you looking at, Price?" Beside him, another man, Antosky, watches the confrontation with sheer panic etched across his face. He begs urgently, "Don't do it, boss." At the sound of the desperation, the prisoner, Price, slowly lifts his head, his eyes opening wide and startlingly blue. He recognizes the distraught man. He breathes out one word, heavy with recognition, "Antosky, is no time for more." The boss produces a heavy revolver, aiming the barrel down and through the bars. Before anyone can move, the prison hall is shattered by a sudden, blinding flash of muzzle fire. When I was a boy, our house always had a parade of uncles, all from my dad's side of the family, who would come and live with us at different times. They all had several jobs throughout their stays, mostly boring ones. But one uncle, Jonah, was different. He was a guard at a really old maximum security prison nearby, and to me, that was pretty cool. That prison is gone now, supposedly demolished to make room for a new subdivision, but that's the official story. I always suspected its removal was for a far different, more disturbing reason. I remember one morning in particular. Uncle Jonah came home from his shift and was totally, unsettlingly off. He wasn't mad, sad, or even upset. He was just off and visibly exhausted. My grandpa was a World War II veteran. Showing any emotion was not something he, or his sons, usually did. When I saw the look on Jonah's face, I knew something truly terrible must have happened. Normally, Uncle Jonah would come home and tell my dad the craziest stories from work, but not today. My dad had already gone, and Mom was out shopping with my little brother. I was alone in the living room, watching TV and happily crunching Cap'n Crunch. Jonah walked in, still in his prison guard uniform, carrying a brown folder, looking profoundly weary. He didn't stop to talk. Instead, he went straight for a beer. Watching him struggle to open the bottle, I asked him tentatively, "Uncle Jonah, are you okay?" He didn't answer. He simply put the bottle to his lips and took a long, hard drink, his eyes shut tight, as if trying to wash away a memory he couldn't stand to keep. Jonah finally speaks, shaking his head and holding the beer tightly. His voice is raw with distress. I don't know what happened," he stammers, throwing his hands up in a gesture of helplessness. I just don't understand." Confused, I just ask, "What do you mean?" He looks down, avoiding my eyes. I can't tell you." But then his demeanor shifts, becoming fiercely serious. He leans in close, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "If I tell you, you can't tell anyone. No one. You understand?" He stares directly at me. "Oh, not even your dad. You need to promise me, Adam." Sitting there, oblivious to the gravity of the request, I simply reply, "I promise, Uncle Jonah." I still don't know why he chose to tell me. I think he just needed to confess the awful weight of it all to someone, anyone, and I was a willing audience. But what he told me next has haunted me to this day. I wish I had stayed in bed that morning and never asked a single question. Jonah began to tell me about him. His name was Dan Doyle. He came to us about 6 months ago on a guard transfer. That's where guards move amongst other prisons, either out of necessity or just to learn how other systems operate. Jonah looked past me, lost in the recollection of the prison yard. He was the creepiest guy I have ever met, and I work guarding complete bastards on an almost daily basis. Born under a lucky star, I guess. He shuddered slightly. He made a first impression that was akin to bugs crawling over your naked skin in the dead of night. There were a few new guards in the room when we met him, but he was all I saw, standing right at the end of the row of newbies. Jonah leaned in, his eyes widening. When he stared at me, Adam, it was as if all the air went right out of the room. As I said, just absolutely creepy as fuck. Jonah took another pull from the bottle, his voice hardening as he shifted subjects. Then there's Karl Antosky. Inmate, complete asshole, thief, rapist, murderer. If there's a crime in the book he hasn't done, I can't find it. Antosky ran his entire unit like it was his own personal gang. I know for a fact he's killed at least 2 other inmates, but we could never prove it. The rules of the prison meant nothing to him. All it took was a trigger. Glance at him wrong, beat him at cards, step in the chow line ahead of him. It all ended the same way, usually with some poor bastard getting beaten senseless with a metal food tray. Working Antosky's block was the toughest, most miserable job in the entire prison, unless Doyle was on shift. Jonah continues his story, describing a typical scene in the cell block. Antosky, muscles coiled with aggression, cornering a smaller, frightened inmate. But then, standing nearby, silent and watching, was Doyle. Antosky would spot him, and his entire demeanor would snap. The bully's face, normally cold and confident, would twist into an expression of sheer primal terror as he met Doyle's unseen gaze. Antosky was just a completely different person when Doyle was around, Jonah recounted, his voice filled with lingering disbelief. I'd never seen anything like it. It was as if the bully suddenly became the bullied. Antosky wouldn't fight back or even speak. He would simply turn, his back hunched, and hurry away from the guard with desperate speed. I'd watch it play out from time to time, this bizarre dynamic between them. It was exactly like a game of cat and mouse. Only the mouse, the most dangerous man on the block, would never run away in blind fear. He would, however, always turn and go hide in his hole in the wall. Antosky would retreat into his cell, desperately trying to put those cold steel bars between himself and Doyle. He looked like a man who understood he was being hunted but knew better than to make a scene out of it. The prisoner sits tense in his cell, trying to read a book, attempting to maintain some veneer of composure. But the problem for the mouse is that the cat knows exactly where it lives. Doyle would approach, stopping directly outside the bars. He would just stand there, silent, his presence alone enough to crush Antosky's bravado. The hardened killer would shrink back, only managing a desperate whisper from the darkness of his cell. "Go away," he would repeat the phrase, his voice ragged with pure visceral fear. "Go away." Suddenly, Antosky's voice ripped through the cell block, loud and frantic, screaming for help. Guard, guard, make him go away. Another guard. My uncle Jonah rushed over, finding Doyle already retreating down the walkway. "Doyle, what's going on in here?" Jonah demanded, confused by the killer's desperate cries. Doyle merely stopped, glanced back, his expression completely blank. "Nothing." "Why?" He didn't wait for a response, just continued walking away. Jonah then turned to the cell. Antosky was curled up on his bunk, hunched over his knees, his massive body trembling. The picture of a hardened, evil man was replaced by one of genuine, infantile fear. "Antosky," Jonah said softly, trying to probe the situation, "is there anything you want to tell me?" The prisoner barely lifted his head, his face wet with sweat and his eyes darting nervously. His voice was a weak, fearful choke. Is he gone?" Jonah looked utterly devastated, his eyes wide and haunted. "If I hadn't seen it myself," he mumbled, still wrestling with the memory. "I didn't know what to say to that kind of pure, heavy fear, so I didn't say anything at all." He finished his beer quickly, the effort of telling the story clearly exhausting him. He stood up abruptly. "Be right back." He returned moments later, holding another cold bottle. He pointed the fresh bottle at me, his gaze intense. "Here's one for you, Adam. Remember what I said about not telling your dad, right? That same rule applies to this, too." He was referring to the need to drink away the memory. Watching him, seeing how deeply that fear had settled into him, I think I finally, for the very first time, understood why adults always say, "I need a beer." "I told you that Doyle was creepy," Jonah says, taking a sip, "but I never really explained why." There was a time in the employee cafeteria that still freaks me out to this day. And after last night's shooting, well, it makes a lot more sense to me now. He recalls entering the drab, brightly lit prison staff cafeteria, picking up a tray of unappetizing food. He sat down to eat and glanced around. Doyle was there, sitting completely by himself, as he always was. Jonah found himself staring. I couldn't stop watching him. Doyle simply sat, silent, eating his meal. But there was something fundamentally wrong about his stillness. There was something about him, Jonah concluded, his voice low with memory, something deeply unnerving. I was staring at him when he just stopped. He couldn't possibly have seen me. He wasn't even looking in my direction, just eating. But then, slowly, deliberately, he turned toward me and locked eyes. I swear to God, Adam, time stopped. Everything around us froze. The movement of his eyes, shadowed deeply by the brim of his cap, was all I could focus on. His stare wasn't just looking at me, it seemed to burrow deep into the hidden corners of my soul, like an invading scalpel exploring my inner thoughts, my dreams, my fears. It lasted for what I would have sworn was hours, but I know it was only a flicker in time. The phrase, "if looks could kill," suddenly held a profound new meaning for me. When Doyle finally walked away and continued clearing his tray, it was like a horrible spell was finally broken and I could breathe again. I stood there, utterly shaken, but then I saw the part of this encounter that freaked me out the absolute most. I looked down at his abandoned table. His plate had not been touched. The awful food, still neatly partitioned in its tray, remained exactly where it had been placed. He hadn't eaten a damn thing. 2. The transfers were usually put up in the old barrack building on site, and Doyle was one of its residents. He had no friends, spoke rarely, and mostly just kept to his room, a distance for which his fellow guards were immensely grateful. I heard one of the other guys talking about him during a shift change. "Damn, Doyle is one creepy guard. He just freaks me the hell out." Another guard replied, "You mean the ghost? That's what some inmates are calling him. 'Cause he never says a damn thing and just kind of floats by. Did you ever notice that you never hear him comin' or goin'?" I looked down at the report I was holding, feeling the collective dread. Like I said, creepy. Doyle never lingered after his shift. He went straight back to the barracks, a temporary shelter for transferred guards. It was a bleak, silent place. Once inside his room, he kept his uniform on and ignored the standard work files sitting on his desk. Instead, Doyle focused on something more personal. He reached under his flimsy table and retrieved a small, dark box. He took it over to his cot, settling down heavily. In that private, silent room, away from the eyes of the prison and the other guards, he finally opened his carefully hidden secret, preparing to stare into whatever memories that black box held. Jonah gulped down the rest of his beer, his eyes still tightly shut against the day's grim memories. He opened them and turned to me. "Adam, you mind grabbing me another beer? I'm gonna start a fire." I looked up at him, puzzled by the strange request. "But it's not that cold in here. Oh, do we really need one?" Jonah's voice was clipped and decisive, brooking no argument. "I want a fire, so I'm gonna have a fire." He strode away, heading towards the fireplace. I still couldn't understand why we needed a fire, but as I turned back to the room, my gaze fell on the brown file folder he had carelessly left on the mantelpiece. It looked important. Quietly, I approached it. "Oh, what's that?" Leaning over the mantelpiece, I started poking at the folder, but my attention was caught by a small black box lying beside it. My eyes widened slightly. "Oh," I murmured. It was an old cigar box. I wondered, why does he have an old cigar box? He doesn't smoke. Suddenly, Uncle Jonah's voice cut in sharply from the kitchen. "Adam, did you get lost? You gonna bring me that beer?" I scrambled, grabbing the cold bottle. "Hello, Hilbert. Here's your beer, Uncle Jonah." He took it, his voice calming once the bottle was in his hand. It's okay. You want to hear more?" I was a bit scared, I ain't going to lie, but of course, I wanted to hear more. I walked up to Antoski's cell to check on things. I knew he was looking for trouble, so I kept my voice calm but formal. Everything okay here, Antoski? The inmate sneered back aggressively. You screw? I just ignored the insult. Nice. Then I shifted my attention to the cell across the way. The prisoner there was slumped low. What do you know across the way there, Price? I paused, examining Price. He was kneeling, practically hugging the bars of his cell, seemingly attempting to make himself as small and invisible as possible. He looked utterly defeated and deeply miserable. I tried asking the prisoner across the way from Antoski, Price, how are things? Price, always quiet and careful, responded with the standard reply. Nothing, boss. Just minding my own business. Same as always. I leaned in close, knowing he saw everything. I know you see things, Price. Things others might not. You sit here all day, right across the way from Antoski's cell. What's the deal with him and Doyle? What are you seeing? What are they saying? Price immediately retreated, trying to put more distance between us. No idea what you're saying. I mind my own business. I pushed harder, desperate for confirmation that I wasn't crazy. There's something about him, something just off. You've noticed that, right? You can't tell me you haven't? Price just stared at me, his face showing a mix of panic and utter refusal to speak. He was too scared to even admit I was right. I turned back to Antoski, who was pressed against his bars, gripping them tightly. What's that got to do with you? I demanded. He scoffed, trying to sound tough despite his terror. Warning. Go hop. Who knows? Doyle's got a hate on for him like they have some beef, only they know what it is. Hell, I don't even know if Antoski knows. I went back to Price. You notice that Antoski seems afraid of him? Like he avoids him every chance he can? Price hesitantly nodded. Yeah. You ever seen Antoski afraid of anything? Or anyone? Price looked away, genuinely conflicted. No, can't say that I have. Right. Well, there you go, Price finally muttered, sinking down further. Then you figure it out. Figure it out? I ain't got no idea and I'm staying out of it. As I stood there trying to process this confirmation of the impossible, I felt a shadow fall over me. I shouted, snapping my head up. Wait, damn, Doyle, don't do that. Doyle was standing right there, his expression utterly neutral. But he asked. I felt myself flush, completely unnerved by his silent approach. He stared at me, a faint, chilling smile playing on his lips. Did I startle you? Just get back to your rounds, I managed, waving him off quickly, trying desperately to regain my composure. Doyle didn't immediately continue his patrol. Instead, he simply walked over to Price's cell and stood there. Price looked up, his face etched with absolute terror, and begged quietly through the bars. Please, just go away, I ain't done nothing to you. Doyle remained silent, unmoving. The inmate quickly reaffirmed his desperate complicity. I don't say nothing. Doyle stared into the shadowed cell one last time, his face unreadable. Then, he simply turned and walked away down the corridor, leaving his disturbing presence and quiet shadow behind. His face trailed back down the echoing hall, calm and utterly chilling. Last night, I finally got the call from the prison, right around 2 a.m. You probably heard the phone ring. It was one of the guards on duty. He didn't waste any words, just 2 sharp sentences, prisoners dead. Get down here. He didn't say anything else. By the time I got there, driving through pouring rain, everything was eerily quiet. A strange, heavy darkness hung over the place. It didn't even look like the prison I had worked at all those years. I had no idea what kind of disaster I was actually walking into. Stepping inside the cell block, I was immediately struck by the oppressive silence. It felt like the entire place was empty. No life, just cold, heavy air. I started at the front, checking units as I walked. Every inmate was motionless, either genuinely asleep or doing a damn good job of pretending to be. Or there was nothing. I finally reached C block, and there were a few of my guys standing around, clustered together. It was dark and quiet, even there. No one was talking, just standing rigid in the shadows. I walked straight up to the group, my voice sharp. Someone want to tell me what the hell is going on? One of the guards looked up, his face grim and pale, and delivered the one shattering piece of news. Antoski's dead. The word just hung in the air, heavy and absolute. I could only manage a slow, hollow whisper. The guard pointed toward Antosky's cell. "He's in there." I approached the bars and looked inside. And there he was, just laying in his bunk, almost looking like he was asleep. He wasn't. He was dead. The bullet hole in his head, just above his ear, made sure of that. I looked closer, confusion mounting. The weirdest thing, though, air was the blood. I turned back to the gathered guards. My voice was sharp with authority. "Do we know how this happened? Any suspects? Where's the gun?" One of the guards grimaced, shaking his head slowly. "No one saw or heard nothing. No one except Price across the way." I approached Price's cell, trying to keep my voice steady. He was the only one who might know anything. "Price, what happened tonight? We know you saw something. Tell me." He looked terrified, shrinking against the back wall. I tried to reassure him. "We'll protect you if that's what you're worried about." Price cut me off, his eyes wide and vacant, his voice barely a breath. "The Ghost." My chest tightened. I knew that name. He was shaking violently. It was the Ghost, yeah. It was him. The Ghost. I stepped back, feeling a profound sickness wash over me. The Ghost. That was the nickname the prisoners gave Doyle. But that was the name they gave the mysterious ones, the ones that were nowhere and everywhere at the same time. I turned to my guards, demanding answers. "Who's on the unit tonight?" "Guys, come on," I snapped at one of them. "Gary, tell him who's on the unit tonight." Gary looked utterly miserable as he confirmed the worst. "Doyle. Doyle is on duty tonight." My eyes widened in horror. We had already looked for him desperately. We looked for him. No one's seen him. Oh, he's just gone. A rage fueled by cold fear erupted in me. This wasn't just a guard. This was something inhuman. I threw out a desperate, harsh command at the remaining officers. Come on, let's go find your ghost." Since Doyle wasn't on the block, the next place to check was his room in the old barracks. The rain was sheeting down outside, adding to the grim atmosphere of the night. We walked through the rain, found the temporary building, and approached the door labeled D. Doyle. The door was closed, which was no surprise. It was always closed. We called out, "Doyle?" Receiving no answer, we quickly used the key. We pushed the door open, our shadows pooling around us, and reached in to flip the light switch, illuminating the small, sterile space. We stepped inside, and the room was empty. But it wasn't just empty, it was unnaturally clean. It looked like nobody had been in it for months, like a maid had just finished cleaning and left 10 minutes ago. There were no books, no spare clothes, no shoes, no stale food containers, nothing at all to suggest that a person had actually lived here. We found the only evidence that Doyle had ever existed in this room resting on the desk, a plain manila file and a worn-out, dark cigar box that looked like it had seen its time pass it by. I picked up the final piece of evidence and Doyle's prison id. I opened the manila folder. Inside were yellowed, brittle newspaper clippings from decades ago. I scanned the headlines and dates, my blood running cold. November 28, 1968. The victim, Daniel John Doyle, shot dead in his home. The bullet entered the skull on the left side, just above the ear. Every detail was an agonizing mirror of Antosky's death. I read on, my eyes wide with sickening realization. The suspect? Michael Stanley Antosky, released due to lack of forensic evidence and witnesses. And critically, the murder weapon had not been recovered. My gaze fell to the worn, dark cigar box on the desk. I knew what was in the cigar box before I even opened it. With a heavy dread, I lifted the lid, confirming my horrifying suspicion. Lying inside was a heavy revolver, the original murder weapon. The revolver lay heavy and cold on the desk, resting against the police reports and newspaper clippings. They detailed the original crime, a homicide report for Doyle David John, documenting his death in 1968. Other headlines screamed about the tragedy, mentioning the slain Doyle family. The records showed Michael Stanley Antosky was arrested for the crime, but due to a lack of forensic evidence and witnesses, he was released. But one article showed a modern headline, "Police Get Their Man." Ooh, killer Carl caught. Antosky had been put away for other crimes, but the central piece of evidence, the murder weapon, the gun now lying on the desk, had never been recovered. The grim face of the murdered man, Daniel John Doyle, stared up from a faded clipping, the same face that was printed on the prison id I held in my hand. It was the face of the man who had been a guard, the man they called the Ghost. Antoski hadn't just been killed, he had been subjected to perfect final justice delivered by the victim he had silenced decades ago. I gathered the guards, my voice low but firm, conveying the dire seriousness of the situation. Now remember, this isn't coming from me. It's coming from a much higher authority, and I don't mean God. I mean someone even higher up, at least as far as you're concerned. I locked eyes with each of them, driving the threat home. This gets out, you'll soon find yourselves unemployable, sitting in the unemployment office. Yeah. Got it? The guards exchanged fearful glances, confirming meekly, yeah, we got it. I finished, my voice icy. I'd just as soon forget all this. It never happened, as far as I'm concerned. I waited for the confirmation, absolute silence hanging in the air. That's right, over them. Never. Whileable. Happened. Meanwhile, across the block, Price, the only witness, was being secured by two heavy-set guards strapped into a straitjacket. He struggled violently, his eyes bulging with terror, his voice ripping through the silence in a final frantic scream. Just! He did it. It was the Ghost. The body, wrapped in a sterile white sheet, was zipped onto the gurney and wheeled out of Antoski's cell. My guards and I stood silent, watching the procession as the corpse was moved through the desolate cell block. The truth of what happened that night was buried deep under the cold, hard floor of Colony Penitentiary. I looked at the closest officer, my gaze heavy with unspoken warning. "Don't see nothin'," I stated flatly. The officer next to me nodded, his eyes wide with fear, repeating the deadly fiction we were now enforcing. Right. Nothing to see here. I called the prison Doyle supposedly transferred in from. They knew who Antoski was, he'd done a stint there a few years back, but they swore to me they had never heard of Doyle. They had no record of him ever working there, period. I was staring at my uncle, trying to piece together the ghost story he was telling me. I asked him, needing a final piece of context, "What's today's date?" Jonah took a long, hard drink from the bottle, his eyes shut tight. He opened them and looked at me, his expression hollow. November 28th, 1978, 10 years to the day. Jonah walked back into the living room, carrying the file folder and the small dark cigar box. He held the box out to me. "Here, hold this." I took the box, looking up at him curiously. "Is this the?" I asked, but he cut me off sharply. "Just hold it, okay?" Without another word, he walked over to the fireplace. He looked down at the manila folder one last time, the file that contained the history of Daniel John Doyle. Then, with a decisive move, he plunged the folder deep into the fireplace, watching intently as the evidence of the impossible caught fire, turning quickly into bright orange ash. He was eliminating all proof, ensuring that the ghost story stayed exactly that, a secret only known by us. Jonah turned from the fire, the last remnants of the past now curling as smoke up the chimney. He looked at me, a strange urgency in his eyes. "Who, up for a ride?" I was confused, but adventurous. Sure. When? Now is as good a time as any." He gestured toward the cigar box still in my hands. "Bring that." We were soon in his car. The engine was quietly as we pulled away. I couldn't contain my curiosity. "Where are we going?" Jonah glanced over, his jaw set. "To take care of a couple of things. How about we hold off on the questions, okay?" He reached toward me, his attention focused on the road ahead. "Reach in the glove box and get out the road map, please." He gave me a thin, weary smile. "Okay, it's not too far. I'll have you back before dinner. No need getting your dad and mom mad at me, too." We drove in silence for a while until Jonah finally spoke, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "Thanks for being here, Adam," he said, looking over at me briefly. "And for listening. I probably shouldn't have told you what I did, but I had to tell someone, and..." He paused, reaching across to lightly touch my shoulder. "You're a good kid, Adam." We were approaching a dense, dark patch of woods beside a river. The end of the ride was near. Jonah looked away from me, his jaw set. "Could you open the box now? And hand me very carefully what you find inside." I opened the old cigar box, revealing the cold, metallic gleam of the revolver. I carefully passed the heavy gun to him. Jonah took it, gripping the weapon that had settled an old debt, his face etched with a look of grim satisfaction and finality. He stared down at the revolver, finishing the haunting thought he couldn't complete 10 years ago. "And you were never found." Jonah stepped out of the car and walked toward the edge of the embankment, holding the heavy revolver. He looked out over the dark, turbulent water. "As it should be," he muttered, his voice cold with absolute certainty. With a swift, powerful movement, he hurled the murder weapon over the stone railing and into the abyss below. The gun arced silently, disappearing beneath the churning surface of the river. He got back into the car, his eyes fixed on me, grave and serious. We leaned close. "Never speak of this to anyone. Promise me." I looked into his eyes, understanding the immense weight of the secret we shared. "I promise," I whispered back. Jonah finally nodded, starting the engine. "Euclide." One more stop and we're done. We drove in heavy silence, my uncle and me. I never spoke to my parents about that morning, about the cigar box, the gun, or the things that happened. I never did. My uncle was too serious a Catholic to make things up, and Jonah himself never said another word. For the rest of the world, it was like it never happened, just a mystery that dissolved into paperwork and shadows. But I know it did. Our final stop was a cemetery. Jonah walked across the green, sunlit lawn toward a grave marker, holding a small bouquet of flowers. He placed the flowers gently on the stone, pausing for a final moment of reverence before turning and walking away. I looked at the inscription etched into the granite. Daniel John Doyle. Died in violence, November 28, 1968. 10 years to the day. Maybe one day I'll ask him about everything he witnessed, about the ghost who walked the halls of Colony Penitentiary for 10 years, seeking vengeance. But not yet.